Welcome to the second edition of SNARK of the Week. I'm your host, Melissa Melton, and this one's going to be a bit of a long one apparently, so you might want to make sure you have a tasty snack, a warm beverage, and you've properly adjusted and secured your straitjacket. So much has happened this week, I don't even know where to begin. Let's just jump right in. Turkey says U.S. favorable to sale of armed drones. Washington, which is providing technical and intelligence to Ankara in its fight against autonomy-seeking Kurdish rebels, deployed 4 Predator drones from Iraq to Turkey last year. NATO ally Turkey is now trying to acquire armed drones. President Obama and Secretary of State Clinton and their aides are trying their best. I'm thinking this is a bad idea. Why am I thinking that? Oh, this might be why. Turkey villagers see Israeli spy and migratory bird. This is a May 16th story, so it's a little bit out of our range, but a migratory bird has caused alarm in a village in southeastern Turkey after locals mistook it for an Israeli spy. Villagers' suspicions were aroused when the bird, a common European bee-eater, was found dead in a field with a metal ring around its leg stamped Israel. They called the police after deciding its nostrils were unusually large and may have carried a microchip fitted by Israeli intelligence for spying. An official at the ministry told the BBC it took some effort to persuade local police that the bee-eater posed no threat to national security. But hey, let's give them armed Predator drones. That sounds like a great idea. Definitely. Makes sense. Total sense. Everybody probably saw my video. If not, it's up on my YouTube channel, having to do with the whole Obama literary agent booklet that came out, saying he was born in Kenya, went through multiple revisions. It was up that way for 16 years until 2007, right before his campaign, when he was magically suddenly born in Hawaii. Now that that's come out, the whole term birther is back in the news, and they're trying to tie the two things together, of using that word birther to really make us all sound like crazy conspiracy theorists and not people who have facts to back up what we're saying. So not only is this Vanity Fair article trying to really lock in the idea that birthers are completely paranoid and Sheriff Arpaio's paranoid, and this would all be funny if it weren't so sad and more than a little bit scary, it says. And this historian Hofstadter, who coined the phrase the paranoid style of American politics, acknowledged that he's borrowing the term paranoid from psychiatry and that it was, quote, pejorative. So he's trying to belittle us by using it, which, I'm not really sure there's a lot of ways to say paranoid in a good way, but whatever. Yay for you and your thesaurus using words like pejorative. Aren't you just so awesome? Here's another one, and I like how this one ends. The Washington Times sums up the present situation with the comment, we may have thought that with the release of the long form of Obama's birth certificate, this would have disappeared for good. However, there are still 41% of Americans who do not believe Obama is a bona fide American, and among Republicans, that number jumps to a shocking 72%. There is a rampant paranoia loose in America. So here's the thing. If you interpret evidence, right, you use critical thinking skills based on that evidence, which is clearly showing you something pretty obvious in your face. That is apparently rampant paranoia now. If you look up at the sky and the sky is blue and you go, the sky is blue, rampant paranoia, guys. That's rampant paranoia. You might want to go get that checked out and maybe get some big pharma drugs to fix that for you, because obviously you're rampantly paranoid and you're a birther and you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. And it doesn't matter that his social security number is problematic, that it's not showing up in any databases, and that the Social Security Administration can't verify his social security number, or the fact that it was issued in 1977 when he was 15 years old, and supposedly, according to all of his eyewitnesses and friends and family, he was attending high school in Hawaii, but for some reason it was issued in Connecticut, so that's totally fine. Don't look at any of that, and especially don't look at it, think critically, and make decisions based on it as to why all of that happened. That's all just a coincidence, you crazy birther conspiracy theorists, okay? Moving on. When Obama went on The View recently, they talked about JP Morgan Chase and the derivatives disaster, and he mentioned CEO Jamie Dimon as, quote, one of the smartest bankers we've got. And after reading this CNN Money article, I'm going to have to go ahead and agree with Obama on something for the first time ever in the history of ever. Um, the title is, Why is Jamie Dimon on a Federal Reserve Board? And then the first sentence is there a conflict of interest when bankers like JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon serve on the board of the same institution that regulates them? That's one of those questions that if you even have to ask it, I'm pretty sure you know what the answer is. And perhaps I'm just not the economics guru because that's not my background. And someone might just have to come on here and school me as to why this is in any possible way okay and not something akin to sleeping with your own cousin. Apparently that's the way it's always been set up. And Diamond was quoted in this article saying it's not like a board, it's more of an advisory group. So he's really just advising by sitting on the most influential branch of the Fed over his own thing. So when you ask that question about whether there's a conflict of interest, don't worry, it's more of an advisory group. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Diamond. That makes me feel so much better about what you have been doing. And oh, look, I see now that your derivatives loss may be upwards of $5 billion. So that's awesome. I guess you should have not taken your own advice. Fail, Mr. Diamond. Seriously, fail. And speaking of things that fail, I saw this article in Natural News. Government tyranny. Illinois Department of Agriculture secretly destroys beekeepers' bees and 15 years of research proving Monsanto's Roundup kills bees. Can anybody say government corporate collusion? Shame on you, Illinois Department of Monsanto Culture. You should just change your name. Illinois Department of Monsanto Culture. Do we really need to have proof that Roundup kills bees? I'm pretty sure that if I drank Roundup, it would kill me, all right? So the fact that we even have to have that, I mean, that to me is like a common sense, common knowledge kind of item. But the fact that there'd be a type of colluding here, which is obviously what's going on, some kind of collusion, and then going in and stealing this guy's bees, stealing his research, obviously for their demon lords Monsanto. And then let's not even forget that after I read this, there was another article about how Monsanto bought a leading bee research firm after they were implicated in it. So if you can't beat them, join them. Basically, they're just going to go buy a bee research firm, and then they can just say whatever they want about. It's very shady. This is completely and totally shady. And I just think it's pretty interesting that they're going to kill bees, and bees are pollinators. We need them for food. So I guess eventually we'll all just be eating mutant frankenfood all the time, and there just won't be any real food ever. And I think it's kind of funny that those scientists at Monsanto won't even eat their own creations. I mean, that's kind of like, I knitted a sweater, but I won't wear it because it sucks. Like, if you won't even eat the food that you made, then obviously you got a problem. And I don't care how much Monsanto pays you, it's not going to buy you a glass of ice water in hell. Okay? So have fun with that. Hope you're sleeping well at night. I'm a little riled up, apparently. All right, so last week I talked about the whole Saverin thing and how Chuck Schumer and Bob Casey, senators, were going to make a new bill to hurt people who leave the country, renounce their citizenship, that are supposedly tax evaders. Now, I want to just backtrack for a second to point out that I'm not saying what Saverin did is in any way awesome. He came here, he got to have all the benefits of being in America for a really long time that made him rich to begin with in a lot of ways. So if he did that, yeah, he's kind of a jerk. But my point is, where are Chuck Schumer and Bob Casey when it comes to pieces like this Nation of Change, How the Ultra Rich Betray America, when it talks about how Apple got its tax bill down to 9.8% last year, and about 2/3 of its profits remain overseas for tax avoidance purposes, and Google, like Apple, avoids taxes by moving most of its foreign profits through Ireland and the Netherlands to Bermuda, and that both of these companies, along with Microsoft and Cisco, are lobbying for repatriation tax holidays to allow them billions of overseas dollars to come home at a greatly reduced rate. I don't see Schumer and Casey just rushing up to that podium to talk about the new bill they're pushing to stop this kind of ridiculousness, which I'm sure is worth quite a bit more money than one Facebook guy. Okay? So it's a little bit hypocritical, and I'm just going to keep hammering that point home as much as I possibly can, because it's ridiculous how much corporatism, crony capitalism BS is going on. Okay? Moving on. Speaking of senators, I sign up sometimes for newsletters that Congress people put out. And this particular one is from Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler, Missouri's 4th Congressional District. And she sent out this for the week of May 14th to the 18th. And I'm not going to read the whole entire thing, but dear friend, the U.S. House took definitive action this week to fulfill our constitutional requirement to provide for the common defense by approving the National Defense Authorization Act to bolster America's defense capabilities. Because that's super constitutional to disappear American citizens without charge or trial. I don't know what Constitution Vicky Hartzler's been reading, but it's obviously not the one that our country was founded on. It must be one that she got in a Cracker Jacks box. And then she goes on to tell me how great this legislation is for our national defense and for the men and women who protect our country. And she points out these little tidbits about it that are just not what's actually important about that bill at all. A number of my amendments are part of the bill, including one to make sure that Coast Guard reservists who are called to active duty under Title 14 are eligible for the same benefits. Okay, yeah, that's great and wonderful, but also what about that whole disappearing American citizens thing? Can we get back to that? Can we mention that at all in here? No, we're not going to mention that, but what we are going to mention is that she's so glad to see approximately $160 million will go to Fort Leonard Wood for vital new military construction projects. Oh man, it cracks me up so much. Really? Do those construction projects have anything to do with, say, I don't know, the FEMA camp that we all know is at Fort Leonard Wood? Which also ties back into, oh yeah, that's right, the fact that they can disappear American citizens without charge or trial. This is a joke, okay, Vicky Hartzler? This is ridiculous. Obviously, you're living in another magical fantasy land of pink flowery trees and pink scarves and pink jackets and just a crap ton of pink. And perhaps all of that pink is blinding you from the reality here in America, where people are actually a little bit upset about the fact, just a smidge, just a tiny bit upset about the fact that their, constitutional rights are being completely raped. So get on the board with that, okay? The Committee on Energy and Commerce put out a press release. Coal plant closures trigger electricity rate increases. The auction set capacity prices at $136 per megawatt across the PJM footprint, which includes the Mid-Atlantic region and parts of the Midwest. This price is 8 times higher than the price set for 2012-2013. Electricity customers in parts of Ohio will be hit the hardest, with the auction setting the price for capacity resources in northern Ohio at $357 per megawatt, triple the 2014-2015 price set last year. As explained by PJM, the auction was impacted by the unprecedented amount of planned generation retirements, driven largely by environmental regulations. So there you go. Obama's EPA cinching down on America. But we don't need electricity anyways, right? We're all going to go live in the dark ages. So that's fine. Okay, moving on. UN readies largest ever Save the Planet summit. And this article in Forbes, it cracked me up when I read it because it says, the question conference gatherers will be trying to answer is, if you could build the future, what kind of future would you want? And it talks about how for some it's healthy water and food, for others it's a good job. But then when it actually goes through the rest of the article, it really just starts talking about Agenda 21 stuff. It never really gets to people getting food or having a good job. It talks more about sustainability and development, and we all know what those words actually mean when it comes to Agenda 21. So when it says in here they want to help people with poverty, by helping them, that could mean helping them out of their life. Helping you to die so that you can help us sustain the earth. That's what that could possibly mean, all right? So I just think it's ironic. I think it's ironic that they have something called Save the Planet, because we all know how awesome the UN is as far as their humanitarian interventions go. Let's recall really quick the history of their humanitarian intervention in the most recent, Libya. You know how they saved Libya by helping the rebels who then took control of Libya and started systematically torturing and interning and killing the African population. The black people in Libya started being killed pretty much on a regular basis, indiscriminately. So that, when I think of people being round up and killed based on their skin color, the first word that always comes to my mind is humanitarian. Definitely. And then we heard about that happening, and then it was only a week later that the story came out about how the UN approved a seat for the Libya rebels. So the General Assembly welcomed Libya's National Transitional Council to the international body in its Friday gathering a week later. So very humanitarian here, definitely. That's what I always think of. And then, of course, they took the economic sanctions off of Gaddafi's billions and gave it to the people who were interning and indiscriminately torturing and killing the black people. Definitely very humanitarian. And when I think of saving the planet, that's what I think of. Killing people. Those two things are definitely synonymous. Good job, UN. Check this out. Okay. The Great Big Book of Horrible Things, World War II and Climate Change. So, World War II, where millions of people died because a guy was completely crazy in the head, is equal to and on the same line as climate change when it comes to the Great Big Book of Horrible Things. And this article says what our great failure in the 1930s may teach about facing the rapid assault on man-made global warming. Or hell is the truth seen too late. And I love how they always put these two things together. It goes along with that whole idea of Holocaust deniers and climate change deniers. When they call someone a climate change denier, they invoke that image with the word denier of a Holocaust denier. Because those two things are equal, and they want to just keep pushing this as much as they possibly can. Okay, so the whole point is that carbon dioxide is evil. Okay? It's evil, and when you inhale, you're fine. That's just dandy. Inhale all day long. Inhale as much as you want. But when you exhale, and you exhale carbon dioxide, you're an evil blight on the planet. Okay? So if you could just inhale all the time, that would be great. If not, you need to pay Al Gore carbon taxes or go kill yourself. And global warming, they had to change that to climate change because the globe wasn't actually warming. But the climate is guaranteed to change because that's what the climate does. It's an ever-changing thing. It always has, it always will. So the climate's guaranteed to change. They had to change it to something that no one could argue with. And I'm going to read a couple of little passages out of here. Quote, "It reminds us that humanity has often and recently failed to prevent collective calamity even when many people can see it coming and try to warn everyone." This to me is like we're just dragging the bottom of the barrel to try and get people to believe in this man-made climate change thing and get on board with it, because that was really our big plan of taking over the world with a one-world government, and you guys just aren't getting on the bus. So get on the bus already, or we're just going to keep trying to hammer this home. You need to pay Al Gore carbon taxes, okay? He has got multiple houses. He's got a heat and cool. Those $30,000 a year bills are not going to pay themselves, guys, all right? You need to realize it. Even if the planet is going into an ice age, that really means it's getting warm, okay? And so that's why you need to totally forget about what happened back in 2009 when the University of East Anglia's Climatic Research Unit was caught in the ClimateGate scandal, and they released all of those emails showing that they had been basically manipulating the global warming data because we're not actually warming. So just totally forget all about that, all right? That is not something you're supposed to remember. You're supposed to forget that, and you're supposed to realize that this is just as bad as World War II. So if you don't want to get on board with that, then they're going to strap you down to a table and force you to watch Inconvenient Truth 25,000 hours until you do, all right? So just realize it, because otherwise you're a climate change denier. Anyway, here's another piece that caught my eye, and I don't think people think about things like this. This is called How Big Oil Benefits from Global Warming Alarmism. First, regarding the green ethanol, consider that it really produces little or no net fuel gain at all, not after the diesel required to power the tractors needed to plant, fertilize, and harvest corn, along with the energy needed to brew it into 180 proof grain alcohol are factored in. Then, for those who care, after the CO2 emissions released in producing it and burning it in vehicles are accounted for, there's really no difference, if any, compared with petroleum. What should matter to everyone, however, is that ethanol has a much lower energy density than gasoline, meaning it yields fewer miles per gallon. So really, in the end, you're not coming out any better. That's what this says. And it's probably the truth. At least so long as voters are gullible enough to tolerate such state and federal lunacy, and taxpayers and consumers can afford to cover the extra costs. So, feeling green makes you feel all warm and good inside, and you feel like you're really doing something for the environment by putting a bunch of corn juice into your car. Maybe you should think about this, because you're actually probably not doing much else other than having to buy more than you normally would. So, pat yourself on the back. You just got sold. Moving on. Merck is back in the news, of course, screwing up someone else's life again this week. Looks like startling results halt HIV vaccine study. I saw this, and for some reason Merck popped into my head. I wonder why. And then, first paragraph, you find out why. The study of the vaccine developed by Merck was recently halted after it was discovered that instead of decreasing HIV infections, it increased the susceptibility to infections. Wow, that's awesome. And then you go on, you read through this a little bit more. It says it was during the same year this was announced about these clinical trials failed. Do you ever wonder what that means when a clinical trial fails? I hear that it's such a scientific, cold, separated statement. But really, if a clinical trial fails, that means there's the potential that somebody's life probably got jacked up because of that. That's how you should interpret that. Clinical trials failed, somebody might have got hurt. So way to go, Merck, on once again caring so much about your bottom line that you would screw people's lives up. That's awesome. I don't trust any vaccines this company makes anymore. Not since I did that whole video having to do with shingles and chickenpox. These people are out for money. That's what this is about. And any other thing that you possibly think about making people's lives better, that's the kind of tripe they have to tell themselves so they can sleep at night. That's all that is. And speaking of vaccines, this was in here too. And it says, it's from the Australian. Vaccine go ahead despite objection. Dramatic details have emerged about an emergency session of Queensland's Supreme Court where doctors fought to vaccinate a newborn child despite the religious objections of the parents. The baby was only 40 hours old and was suspected of contracting hepatitis B from the mother and required 2 vaccines within 8 hours or would otherwise have a 4% risk of death in young adulthood. So there's a 4% risk that this baby could have died from hepatitis B. So it definitely needed to have these vaccines. I wonder what the percent risk of all the aluminum adjuvants in the hepatitis B vaccines, how much damage that will do on a 40-hour-old baby's brain. I wonder what the percent risk of that is. I'm going to go ahead and guess it's more than 4. So, anyway, it says the child's father feared chemicals in human plasma used to produce the necessary immunoglobulin and hepatitis B vaccines would expose the baby to increased risk of dementia and the rare brain disorder Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. But the medical experts said these are minor and do not often occur. I wonder what their definition of often is. Is it 4%? Is 4% often that we have to shove aluminum into the brain of a newborn baby? You sick freaks! And speaking of more evil, this I saw everywhere, splashed all over the news for days this week. Flu shot beneficial to pregnant women and fetuses. Flu shots for moms may cut risk of stillbirth, premature births. Flu vaccine aids expecting mothers and fetuses. Flu shots may be beneficial to your baby. This one says flu shot during pregnancy protects baby. So the H1N1 flu vaccine is awesome. Every pregnant person should get it. This study proves that it is actually better for you to have it than to not have anything at all. So I don't know how we have billions of people on this planet before we had this flu shot. I don't get it, because obviously this flu shot is so protective and wonderful that I don't know how anyone lived without it, because it's so great for you and your baby. We definitely need to shoot ourselves up with more live weekend viruses. All right, here we go. I can't even, Fox News even did a whole video report on flu and pregnancy and how great this study is. And it's like, really? Okay, I'm done. Here we go. First of all, This flu vaccine is made with live weakened viruses. Okay, it has swine flu in it. It's got human flu virus in it. It's got mercury in it. You can go look up the ingredients. You can find this for yourself. Okay, where are you ever just going to catch these viruses all together? Are you going to step out of your house and walk into a cloud of human flu viruses and swine flu viruses all mixed together and you're just going to get that naturally? Does that happen to people? If that happens to you, you must live in some magical virus land, okay, where that could happen. Because I'm pretty sure that doesn't just occur in nature, okay? And if you go to the CDC's own website, it says on here, in regards to flu vaccines, that infants younger than 6 months of age are too young to get any flu vaccines. It says that on the website. So if you are, apparently, according to this, if you are between the ages of born and 6 months old, you can't get a flu vaccine. If you are between the ages of fetus and fetus, or 6 months old and older, you're fine. So if you're a fetus, totally fine for you to get that, because apparently when they just inject your mother with mercury and weakened live viruses, that somehow pads it and makes it okay when you get that. So I would like to know what the dose is actually of healthy mercury for a fetus. Oh, that's right, 0, because it's none. How about healthy mercury for anyone? Oh, yes, that's right again. 0, none. Mercury is not good for you. Okay? If someone thinks mercury is good for you, please show me where you have conclusive proof of that. I would love to see it. Okay? And this study doesn't prove jack. This study is a puff piece to try and sell people more vaccines. And it even says it in the study, there's doctors going, or in a lot of these articles, there's doctors going, this will be so helpful when I talk to my pregnant patients about the benefits of vaccination. They're going to use this BS study to sell more freaking vaccines. And it's awful, because this study was not an official clinical trial with like a placebo group and then they contrasted that and ran statistical analysis. No, this study is just some doctors at a hospital went into their database and took all the patients that had gotten the vaccine, which was like 42% of their sample, and then the rest of the patients, and contrasted them. That does it. There's all kinds of mitigating factors that this does not make up for. You can't just do that. That's not an official study. It could just be that women who get vaccines are more health-minded, and therefore they eat healthier food or take better care of themselves, and so therefore that's why. There's all kinds of other reasons for that. You cannot, based on what this says, there is no way to tie conclusive proof to that. This is BS. This is sad. I really hope that women will not fall for this. And also, just on a side note, I came across, this study was done in Canada. I actually came across a Canadian-based website where people came on after the whole N1H1 vaccine came out to talk about the side effects that they personally felt from getting it. And you want to be pregnant and get some flu vaccines? Why don't you go on there and read about some of the horrible things that have happened to people that have gotten this vaccine? Seriously, this makes me sick. All right, I'm going to follow that up with something funny, because that was not funny. That was just horrible. This came out of the Daily Beast. Meet Keith Judd, the felon challenging Obama. The president lost a whopping 40% of the vote in Tuesday's West Virginia Democratic primary to Judd, an inmate in a Texas federal prison. Apparently, Judd has been involved in a number of organizations, including something called the Homeless People's Voting Rights Association and the little-known Federation of Superheroes. He claims to be the son of actress Lillian Russell, who died in 1922, even though Judd was born in 1958, and he claims that he has ESP. His favorite website is Google. And all he had to do to get on the ballot was fill out a certificate of announcement and pay $2,500 filing fee. Yeah, I would agree with the writer of this article when he says it's quite significant that an incarcerated prisoner garnered 40% of the vote against a sitting president. Maybe it's because West Virginia has been so screwed over in this whole EPA coal witch hunt. Maybe that's why. Maybe people in West Virginia are not too cool with losing their jobs and their ability to feed their families. Maybe that's why. I'm not sure, but this is awesome. What else? Monsanto is poised to deliver dozen new soybean traits. I love when these things come out and they say dozen new soybean traits. They don't use the phrase genetically modified at all now, because they realize what that means to people. So basically, this is not just a dozen new soybean traits, but really it's 12 more ways that the food has been turned into a genetically modified science experiment, okay? And here's what the article says. We're calling the 2010s the, quote, decade of the bean because Monsanto has a mix of 12 biotech and breeding traits in its soybean research and development pipeline that are targeted to give farmers the tools they need to maximize their yield opportunity, said Roy Fuchs, Monsanto's global oilseeds technology lead. Yay! I wonder if we could call it, maybe we shouldn't call, I don't know if we should call it Decade of the Bean. I'm thinking maybe we should call it Decade of the Super Mutant Weeds, because this article also came out this week. Monsanto's mass super weeds force sustainable farming. What happens when Monsanto's modified creations get out of hand and threaten the biosphere with mutated super weeds that continue to suffocate farmland across the entire planet? Resistant weeds currently cover 4.5 million hectares, or 2.4 acres per hectare, in the United States, though experts estimate the worldwide land coverage to have reached at least 120 million hectares by 2010. And the outcome of this hyper-resistance, of course, is excessive use of further herbicides. Well, of course, let's just spray more chemicals all over the place. That's a very good idea. Now for a Fukushima update. The UN's World Health Organization has released a report to let us all know that Fukushima radiation doses are below normal. They pose little health threat, and they're way below causing cancer levels. And the 6 workers at the Dakai nuclear power plant that died after this did not die from radiation, and there's little health risk seen from the Fukushima radioactivity. And the media has just jumped on this like a pack of starving hyenas at a hot dog eating contest. So let's look at a couple of these stories. This one's from the New York Daily News. UN says most Fukushima radiation doses below norms. A year after Japan's nuclear accident at Fukushima, the World Health Organization says several areas near the plant had radiation above cancer-causing levels, but most of the nation did not. And the 124-page report says neighboring countries had similar levels to normal background radiation, and for the rest of the world there was some minor exposure through food. Like, that's just a footnote at the end of the story. This just some minor exposure in your food. That's okay, rest of the world. Well, if that's how much exposure the rest of the world has, what do you think Japan has? That's just a question, because it's just minor exposure. It's not a big deal. And then you've got Fox News, UN, Fukushima workers' deaths not from radiation. A year after an earthquake and tsunami triggered the Fukushima disaster, a United Nations agency preparing a report on the health effects says none of the 6 former reactor workers who have died since the catastrophe perished due to the effects of radiation. The story doesn't go on to say what they did die of, but just so you know, the UN says it wasn't radiation. So don't be worried about that. We don't know what they died of. It must have just been a magical coincidence because it wasn't radiation, okay? So don't worry about that. And they also say the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation said Wednesday that although several workers at Japan's Fukushima Dakai nuclear plant were irradiated after contamination of their skin, quote, no clinically observable effects have been reported. Well, let's check out what the American Cancer Society says about radiation. Ionizing radiation, quote, the damage takes place in only a fraction of a second, but other changes, such as the beginning of cancer, may take years to develop. So of course they can use things like no immediate effects, because there wouldn't be any immediate effects. It's not like you go lick a radiated ice cream cone and then you have 5 heads. That's not how it works. Cancer takes years to develop. We're not going to see this right away. So for them to say that and release it in an official report is just great. I could release a official report and say all kinds of stuff, but it doesn't mean anything because we haven't begun to see the effects of this yet. And just on another note on that, I found this on the Intel Hub. Radiation exposure from Fukushima is much higher than mainstream media exposure. And this is from last year after it happened. But the point that I'm making out of this, that I think is the take-home, is the 7th edition of the Biological Effects of Ionizing Radiation report on health risks from exposure to low levels of ionizing radiation came to a conclusion that there is no safe level of or threshold for ionizing radiation exposure. So that means none. It doesn't mean some is okay and minor effects in your food, and you can just have a little bit, and that's just totally fine. This report even concludes that background radiation can cause some cancers. But when you read this UN, all these news stories about how the radiation is just fine and there's just no health effects, the way that the media just clamored all over that, it's like we should just all hop a plane to Japan right now, strip down naked, and roll around on the floor of the Dakai nuclear power plant. Or, maybe just go swimming in Building 4's spent fuel pool. Blech. Say that 5 times fast. But it's like, just ignore this. Everything's fine. There's all these mass animal deaths and weird stories about people's noses bleeding and their hair's falling out. But you know what? Just drizzle some chocolate sauce on that and put a cherry on top. Just eat that right up because the UN said so. And I mean, I don't know about you. I believe absolutely everything the UN says ever. So, speaking of organizations I love, this came out in Forbes. You may have to pay more to be groped and scanned by the TSA. The 2013 Homeland Security Appropriations Bill would increase one-way fees for passengers from $2.50 to $5 in order to close a budget shortfall at the Transportation Security Administration. If the legislation passes, you'll be paying $10 for your security experience per round-trip ticket instead of $5. Yay! So move over, legalized prostitution in Nevada, because we're going to pay double and get felt up by the TSA every time we go on vacation. I, for one, am looking forward to that. And here's another piece I came across on the Lou Rockwell blog. Corporations just want to help with the TSA's gate rape. Homeland Security Department contractors such as Adobe, Boeing Company, and IBM announced Monday the creation of the Washington Homeland Security Roundtable. They hope to, quote, start a dialogue to make it easier to do business with TSA. Director Kay Olive said, I think TSA is looking every way they can to improve and increase effectiveness, and we just want to help with that. I think they're just looking for opportunity. Opportunity to what? Molest and radiate and humiliate people? Yay, get on board with that, corporations. Opportunities like this one? TSA hired accused sex abuse priest pedophile as screener. Man was removed from ministry after 3 cases of reported sexual abuse against young girls. Well, I guess, you're right. The TSA is looking for the opportunity to really just hire the best. You don't want to hire an amateur. You want to go straight to the professional source of molestation. So there you go. That's another reason not to fly. I mean, because they can't even stop themselves from hiring known pedophiles. They can't even get their HR right. But they're going to stop terrorism. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I totally trust that. That works. Here's a couple pieces that'll make you feel all warm and gushy about our government. Court rules CIA torture methods still a matter of national insecurity. This is from Alexander Higgins' blog. I love that title. But federal appeals court rules that details about CIA torture methods are to remain off limits to public while the CIA torture-in-chief goes on a book tour bragging about the methods. Yay! The man who led the CIA torture program is now on a nationwide book tour, bringing the subject of torture back into the spotlight by promoting his book on his years at the CIA and his role in leading the CIA's torture program. So this ruling not only authorizes continued use of torture, which is outlawed by international law, but it additionally gives the government continued permission to lie about such war crimes and cover it up, because it's national security, you guys. You guys can't know about this, all right? So that's wonderful. And then I saw this on Fox News. 1 million counterfeit Chinese electronic parts used in U.S. military. Report finds. Some 1 million counterfeit electronic parts from China were in use in U.S. military aircraft, risking national security and the safety of U.S. soldiers, a Senate committee report has found. The report noted that Beijing was openly allowing counterfeiting operations in the country. I wonder if that goes along with this other story. The #1 U.S. export to China, waste paper and scrap metal. So basically they're buying our scrap metal, our trash, and they're making it into counterfeit parts and selling it back to us so we can put it in our aircraft, risk our national security and the safety of our officers. That's brilliant, actually. That is a brilliant economic strategy. I wonder if that's why China has been called the number one leader in economic espionage. And speaking of sold, this piece took 2 guys to write for the Huffington Post. 10 myths about drones. And I'm not going to read you the whole entire article. You can Google this or start page it yourself. But I love some of these myths. And then the last myth. This is why I had to include this in here. Because, we have to all get on board and really love the police state. You have to love it. You have to embrace it. It is wonderful to have drones flying overhead and surveilling everybody. It's a wonderful, loving thing that our government's doing for us. And you have to love that too, okay? So let's just go through a couple of these. Myth number 5, police need a warrant to observe you with a drone flying below 400 feet. I'm not even going to read the whole thing. The fact that that's a myth at all should upset people. It's not right. And myth number 6, police flying a drone to the scene of a crime can only use footage acquired at the crime scene itself. No, they don't have to do that either. But it ends with the downsides of drones outweigh the benefits. And then it tells us just how they provide life-saving vital imagery in different scenarios. And it's just so wonderful. And it's going to create jobs and blah, blah, blah. So just go, if you want to just be filled with all the different ways you should love our government, go to the Huffington Post. Brought to you by Mr. Soros. I would feel sorry if a first grader was writing a school paper and used the Huffington Post as a source. It's that bad. I would more likely believe something that was written by an insane lunatic in his own feces, okay, on a subway wall, than I would half of the stuff that comes out of this newspaper. And the fact that they had to get 2 people to write this story to try and tell us about this, and then sum it all up at the end about how, the risks or the benefits outweigh the risks, is just even more sad. It's just sad. Moving on. Pakistani award-winning drone filmmaker denied right to enter U.S. Youth's drone movie creating international buzz, possibly prompting Obama administration to reconsider its weapon of choice secrets. Pakistani filmmaker's award-winning movie was about drones. It followed a child whose entire family was killed in drone attacks. And it's called The Other Side. Under the Obama administration, drone strikes by the Central Intelligence Agency and the military have become increasingly common as a primary tool in the U.S. national security strategy. But he can't even come to our country to accept the award that he's won for making this film. Gee, I wonder why. I guess that probably doesn't fit in too well with the whole propaganda strategy that we all need to believe that our tax dollars going to the building of war machines and unconstitutional drone strikes killing thousands of innocent civilians all the time is totally fine. Yeah, that probably doesn't fit too well with that, so they're not even going to let him in. That's really sad and pathetic. And if there's any golden lining to it, at least his crotch won't get grabbed by the TSA. Which segues into my next story. Even more TSA news on Infowars.com. TSA gropers being trained to feel for crotch bombs. TSA head John Pistol admitted recently that screeners are being trained to pay specific attention to the crotches of travelers moving through airport security. So that's really good. You know what? I think it has been high time that we really focus on people's crotches. Because last time I read a report on terrorism, it really did say that like 95% of all terrorism comes from crotches. So I'm so glad they finally decided to focus on this. It's definitely not the cargo that they aren't checking that I mentioned last week. Those giant boxes that go in the bottom of the plane that could totally hide all kinds of stuff, like a whole elephant could probably be in there, and that's fine. But, let's not check that. Let's check people's crotches, because really, let's just get down to the meat and bones of where all terrorism starts, your crotch. Okay? Let's just get right in there and check that out. What a joke! These people are such a joke. If I had to go to a training on checking people's crotches for bombs, that's the day I'd be reevaluating my job. Although I never would be a TSA person to begin with because I don't like to molest people against their will and radiate people and die of cancer. But Still, I think that's the day you need to start reevaluating your position in the world, is the day that you show up to an official work-related training and it's all about really getting up in someone else's crotch. That's the day, all right? That's the day. Unless you're a gynecologist, you need to move on. And speaking of sad, I'm really sick and tired of everyone calling in the media and different news releases that I see, they call the Fast and the Furious a scandal. Yes, it's a scandal, but it's almost like they use that word to make it sound all salacious when really it meant like the death of a lot of people. That's not really a scandal. That's called murder, all right? So stop trying to make it equal to like, oh, who's J-Lo with this week? It's not, okay? It's worse than a scandal. But anyway, according to this ACLJ release, the Operation Fast and Furious scandal's back in the news, as is Attorney General Eric Holder's stonewalling of Congress's valid investigation into the scandal, stonewalling that may get him charged with criminal contempt. So if you're not familiar with Fast and the Furious, it allowed thousands of guns to be smuggled from the U.S. into Mexico that ended up in Mexican drug cartel hands, and a lot of people died because of that, okay? And supposedly the purpose was they were going to track weapons and arrest people in these cartels and dismantle the cartels, but none of that ever actually happened. What happened was criminals had guns and it exacerbated the violence and more people died. That's what happened, okay? And Holder has refused to turn over subpoenaed documents despite efforts of the Oversight Committee to acquire them and to accommodate any of Holder and the Department of Justice. Department of Justice. The fact that the Department of Justice is obstructing justice, does that make any of you laugh? That is ridiculous. And Chairman Issa sent a letter to the Oversight Committee explaining the various issues the committee may consider at the upcoming meeting to decide whether or not to hold Holder in contempt of Congress. Yeah, well, you know what? I think Holder should be held in contempt of humanity. Okay? I think that's what he needs to be held in contempt of. And what's even more ridiculous is if he's convicted of criminal contempt, he faces a fine and up to 1 year in prison. That's it. That's all. That's all he's going to get. A fine and up to a year in prison. Okay? In a day and age where a woman in Florida shot a warning shot at her known abusive husband into the ceiling of her garage, and she got 20 years in jail, and it was obvious she wasn't even trying to kill the guy. She was just warning him to get away from her because she was afraid for her life. She's going to get 20 years in prison. This guy can directly be tied to many people's deaths, and he's going to get a fine and up to a year in prison. That's justice for you right there. That is the Department of Justice obstructing justice. I'm going to end on something for you to think about. This last piece. Russia tests secret missile after NATO shield launched. A new intercontinental ballistic missile, so secret it has no name, has been successfully tested in Russia, the Defense Ministry says. The missile carried a dummy warhead and was fired 6,000 kilometers. And it came just days after NATO activated the missile shield in Europe. Now, NATO is saying that the shield is meant to protect members from a missile fired by a rogue state, implying Iran, I guess. But Russia says the shield upsets the military balance, and it seeks to undermine their nuclear deterrent. So, Russia's threatened to turn its missile launchers on vital NATO sites. So, this is not good, people. This is something to definitely keep an eye on. This is not a good deal. Well, I guess that's about it. I guess this week was uber long. Sorry about that, guys. I will try to keep it a little bit shorter, more succinct next time. This is new for me, so keep in mind really quick that next week is Occupy Bilderberg, Chantilly, Virginia. You might want to look into that if you can go. I wish I could. Don't have the resources, but I think it's going to be probably the biggest party for the Bilderbergs yet, so definitely keep that in mind. And I'll see you guys next Saturday with Snark of the Week. Melissa Melton, my blog is truestreammedia.com.